Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis from Autodesk. I also have Angelo helping me out this time. He's going to be my wingman for today's presentation, as Aaron is actually in Africa helping, I think, teach Fusion 360 out there. So you'll probably hear more about that when he gets back. So today's topic, I'm going to be talking about creating animations and exploded views. I've seen this question come up a couple times where people want to know, how do you show like an animation, like how things move, or how do you create that really cool drawing that has these exploded views? And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So you can see my screen right now. I have an assembly called Utility Knife, and it is right now it's a flat assembly, which means there's no sub-assemblies or anything like that. And this is going to come into play. You're going to hear me talk a lot about organization and structure because those things are really important when we start doing animations and exploded views. So I've got this cool design. I'm going to go ahead and switch my workspace from design to animation. And you'll notice that my screen changes a little bit. So if you've done any kind of video editing, it's going to seem a little bit similar to that. And you'll see what I mean here in a little bit underneath this animation timeline. But it's going to basically break things down into chunks and tell when those movements need to happen and at what time. So I'm going to kind of walk through the user interface first, and then we'll dive right in. So you can see that we are in the Animation Workspace. And moving left to right, we have what's called a storyboard. And you'll notice that down here at the very bottom, it says Storyboard 1. You can actually have multiple storyboards. And you can kind of think of them as almost like scenes in a movie. So Storyboard 1 might be, the blade going back and forth. The Storyboard 2 might be like, I want to show an exploded view. Storyboard 3 might be like an assembly or something like that. And you can have as many storyboards as you want. Okay. The next menu where you're going to spend most of your time is in this transform menu. And you'll see we're going to cover most of these commands in here, but we have these AutoExplodes. So it's going to explode your assembly for you automatically. We've got this manual explode, which I personally like, which you'll see here in a little bit. And then we have transform components. So, physically moving things around. The next icon over is the annotation or callout, where you can actually like put something on, like, for example, let's say you're doing an assembly animation. You could do a call out saying, add glue here, or, wait to dry, or something like that. And so you can add those call outs. This view, you'll notice, has this little record icon, and this will make more sense as we're going through. But basically, when you're in the Animation Workspace, it's going to always record what you're doing. And again, I'll show what that means here in a little bit. And then finally, we have publish, where once you've done your animation, you can actually publish it out as a video. Okay. Down here we have our animation timeline, and you'll see a bunch of numbers, and we have this slider over here that we can move back and forth. And again, you'll see what this does as we go through. And then lastly, what I want to show are two little icons down here. This first one is full screen mode. So if you're like playing this back in a presentation, you can switch to full screen mode. And then we also have a settings. So you can kind of see the different recording modes. So we have everything start from time 0, overlap by half a second, or sequential. And then also show a text watermark when the camera view is not recording. And again, that's this icon here. Okay, so let's go ahead and use this utility knife to create an animation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with, let's do this AutoExplode all levels. Now what this means is it does not care about any structure or sub-assemblies or anything like that. It's going to physically just explode every single component. And I used the key word there. I used the word component. So these do need to be components to use the animation module. Okay, so I'm going to say AutoExplode all levels. And you'll notice I instantly get a warning that says no available components for exploding. And I did this on purpose because I get this all the time. I'm like, what does this mean? Well, what you want to do is expand open your components over here. And we can see that I've got a bunch of components underneath this utility knife. So I'm going to go ahead and select that utility knife. Then I'll do my AutoExplode all levels. And this time it's going to think for a little bit. In fact, you'll see a little progress bar go by. And then you can see that it's physically exploded these out. Okay. Couple different icons here. So you'll notice in my timeline, I've got a bunch of these blue boxes, and you can see this slider. I'm going to go ahead and drag this slider, let's just say over to about 6 seconds. And what this is doing is it's basically showing me my individual components. Something's happening at frame 0 all the way to frame 6. And basically what's happening is at frame 0 it was assembled, and at frame 6 it's kind of exploded. I could also come in here and say, do I want one step or sequential? So, and this is just, unfortunately this is a little, I'd say a bug. Sometimes it doesn't let me do a sequential explosion. So I'll show it to you here in another session, but I can come in here and grab this slider and drag this slider. We can actually see how far we want these parts to explode. Now you'll notice an issue. It is exploding, but it's not really exploding the way that I like. And that's okay because we're going to learn some other commands in here. But I'm just going to explode it to like so and say okay. Now what did it do? Well, if I drag this slider to the left, we can actually watch the animation. So we can kind of see over a period of 6 seconds, it automatically exploded those parts away. And you'll notice they kind of go in random directions. And this is one of the things I don't really like, but the cool thing is we have control over this. Okay. So the key thing is I dragged the slider to 6 seconds, told it how far I wanted to for it to explode, and it did that in 6 seconds. Okay. Okay. So you're going to be using this slider quite often. You can kind of drag back and forth. You can set it to a very particular time. So like right here, I'm at 8 seconds. Okay. And so if I were to do something, for example, if I were to rotate, you can kind of see how the camera has rotated up to that time. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we don't want that. Now, as we're looking at this, like I said, it did explode, and it exploded every single part, but it didn't really explode it in the directions that I wanted it to. However, I do have control over this. So for example, I'm going to click on this back grip, and we can see that it highlights it in our animation timeline, and this is called grip. If I right click on this area here, you can kind of see we could change its duration. So I could say instead of 6 seconds, I want it to be 8 seconds or something like that. I'll say okay, and now you can see that it's going to take 8 seconds to make that transition. I can also manually just drag that back if I want to. Okay. I can edit when does it start and when does it end. So you can see right now it's starting at 0 and ending at 6. Well, I could come in here and say I want it to start at second 2 and end at second 6. And you can see that we were able to change that. So now that part isn't going to move You can kind of see that grip is staying put until we get to frame number 2, or I'm sorry, second number 2, and then it starts to move. Again, I can do that manually or I can type it in. What I use quite often is edit action. So I'm going to click on edit action. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. And we can see that it actually moved. When it did the explode, it put it way down here. And I now have control where I can drag this back up. Maybe we kind of, let's just maybe bring it to the side a little bit and kind of have it explode down and away. So I'm going to say, okay. Let's go ahead and drag this now, and you'll see that sure enough it's kind of going down and away, and it's not going very far this time. So I let the computer kind of do the hard work. You know, it kind of exploded everything out, and then now I can come back and tweak with things. So for example, I'll click on this part here. That's the left. Let's just go ahead and edit that action and say, you know, instead of going on the far side of the blade, I want it to come out this direction. I'll say okay, drag my slider, and we can see that sure enough that's now coming out toward us. Okay. Hopefully that's making sense. The key thing there is that you have a lot of control using that edit action. So this is the blade cradle, so I'm going to go ahead and edit the action for the blade cradle, and let's just maybe bring that down instead of back, and let's just take a look at what that looks like. Now I've been dragging the slider back and forth. Okay, you also have some commonly used icons, so rewind, play, and fast forward. So I'm going to hit rewind, then I'm going to hit play, and we can actually watch this live and see what that looks like. Now, you'll notice that they're all happening at the same time. Every single part is moving at the same time. Well, maybe I want to control the order of how things work. So, for example, I want this grip to slide off first because it actually kind of holds the gold parts together. So I'm going to say I want these two grips to move first. So let's go ahead and select everything else. Let's just drag those to the right a little bit, like so. Okay. Now watch what happens when I hit play. So the grips are going to move off first, and then the other parts are going to move. And in fact, I kind of noticed that this blue part moved through the gold parts. So let's go ahead and move the gold parts next. So that's left and right. So we're going to go ahead and keep left and right where they are. And let's just move blade cradle to the right a little bit. Okay, we'll rewind, we'll hit play. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Now it's going kind of slow, so I might want to edit the time, but now you can see that the parts come off, and then finally the blue blade comes down. Now that took a really long time, so I could come in here and just, you know, drag these down like so. I could even, let's just drag that maybe to like 2 seconds. I'll do the same thing here. Drag that to like 2 seconds, and then we can grab all of these and move them to the left. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag those to the left. Hit play. And we can watch. Note they move a little bit faster now. Doesn't take as long, and now you notice the blue part will move pretty fast compared to what it was before. Okay. And then finally, you can even do some more stuff where you can actually overlap. And I'm going to go ahead and drag these over just a little bit so they overlap a little bit. And this is going to give you a little bit smoother, almost like a kinematic type movement. So watch what happens now. So these are going to move, and then those other ones are going to start to move even before these are finished. Okay? So you can kind of create a little bit, a little bit more realistic looking. Let me just do this guy, drag him to the left. A little more realistic looking. And again, it depends on what your end goal here is, but you can kind of see how they're moving. You know, the blue part started moving before the gold parts had finished. And it's as simple as just moving these fields around. Okay, now here's something you'll notice. This is another tip. You'll notice that the parts are kind of off the screen. And if I move my mouse a little bit, I'm going to try and zoom out a little bit, you'll notice that it put a camera icon in here. And let's watch what happens now. I'm going to rewind. I'm going to hit play. And watch, once it hits that camera icon, you're going to see it's going to zoom out a little bit. So here's one of the tips. These camera icons will appear quite often, and they actually annoy me. So what I do is I just let them happen. I just let them show up, and then I clear them all out once I've got my animation the way I want, and then I'll go back and put the camera movements in that I want. Because I might be rotating just to look at something or whatever, but in my final design, I actually want it to be a nice, smooth rotation. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So you'll notice it put this icon in here. And let's say I'm over here somewhere and I kind of zoom out like this, you'll notice it puts one there. And then maybe I'm here and I kind of look at it this way, and you'll see it puts another icon there. Well, now watch what happens when we play this. We're going to get some kind of weird camera movements, so it's moving, kind of rotating and stuff like that. Kind of almost annoying, right? So it might be putting these in here, and that's okay. We're going to go ahead and remove those. But why is it putting these in here? And that's because of this icon right here. Okay, if I turn that off, you'll notice it now says view is not recording. So if I came in here and rotated, you'll notice that it's not putting that camera icon in there. Okay, until I say record, and then I move, you'll see it just put an extra little camera icon in there. Okay, so I did a lot of camera movements in here. I'm going to go ahead and select all of those and say delete. It kind of puts me back to my original location. Here's another tip. You'll notice this little region right here. It looks like these little curtains, kind of like theater curtains. If I drag my slider into that, I'm not actually in my timeline. I'm kind of setting my stage, and that's what that little icon is. It's a stage icon. So I'm going to get my view something like that, and now when I hit play, notice that the animation is working from that view and everything fits. So if you don't want it to be recorded, you just drag your slider into here and you can get your view the way that you want. Then when you hit play, you'll see the result. Now obviously that's kind of a bad camera angle because we're looking at it straight on or whatever. So maybe we want to start straight on, but then I want to end up kind of looking like this. And you'll notice it threw in the camera for me. If we were to play this, it's going to stay straight on all that time until it gets there, and then it's going to start to rotate. Well, maybe I want to kind of do a cool camera pan, so I'm going to stretch this to be the full length. Now watch what happens. When I hit play, it's going to gradually change the camera angle that whole time until we get to the end. So hopefully you see there that we actually have lots of control over how this thing's going to look. Okay. Okay, let me do that again with some of the other commands. So I'm going to come in here and switch to animation. I'm going to show the exploded view again real quick. Let me just do this. I'll do a transform. Let's do all levels. Hopefully I'll be able to do the sequential. So let's drag this maybe over to 6. I'll say sequential, and sure enough, Notice how it did that for me automatically. So I didn't have to do it manually like I showed before. Okay, so that's the sequential explosion. Okay, so we just did an all level, which explodes everything. I'm going to show the one level here in a little bit. So the next thing I want to show is manual explode, and honestly I use this one probably the most, that and transform components. So manual explode is a little bit more manual, but I think it gives you a lot of power. So check out how this works. I'm going to say manual explode, and my cursor says select components to explode. So what I can do is click on a component and you'll see this triad appear with all of these arrows. Well, I want the blade to explode out to the left, so I'm going to click on that left arrow. And that's all I have to do. I want this grip to explode up, so I'm going to click on the up arrow. I want the blue blade holder to slide to the left also, so I'm going to click on that left arrow. And I just keep working my way around. So this body here, I want to extrude to the right. The one on the back, I want to explode to the left. And finally, the grip, I want to explode back. Okay? Now I can drag my slider, let's say around 6 seconds. Let me just go ahead and drag that to about 6. Oops. And watch what happens when I do my explosion scale. You'll see that those parts are actually exploding in the directions that I told them to explode. And notice I get a much more realistic looking result by doing it this way. So yes, I did have to click on the parts and tell them which directions I wanted them to move, but it makes way more sense. Like parts didn't go way down below and all that kind of stuff. Now, again, it's not perfect. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And I want to control some of this. So this is the blade cradle. I'll edit the action, and let's just drag that back a little bit, something like so. I'll click on, oops, I'll say OK. I'll click on this part here, which is the grip. I'll edit its action. And let's just move that up maybe just a little bit more, say OK. And then finally, let me scroll down a little bit. This is the grip there. I'll edit its action. And let's just maybe look at it from the side. And again, I kind of like to have it slide off the back, so I'm just going to do something like so. Okay, now notice when I did that, it recorded a couple camera movements, which I'm going to go ahead and delete because I don't want those. But this view isn't all that great, so I'm going to drag to the stage and kind of zoom out a little bit. But now when I hit play, we're going to see how those all explode in the direction that I told it to. Okay, in a matter of 6 seconds. Okay. Hopefully this is making sense. There's lots of options here, so I'm just going to keep kind of going through and giving you some tips and tricks. Here's another cool trick that not a lot of people know about. Is I showed it how to explode, right? When I hit play, it's assembled and then it explodes out. But maybe I want to show an animation of how this thing actually gets assembled. Well, all I have to do is right-click on my storyboard. Okay, so I'm way down here in the lower left corner. I'm going to go ahead and say reverse. And what it does is you'll notice now I'm at frame 0, it's exploded, and when I hit play, it's actually going to put the assembly together. Okay. So all I had to do was explode it and then tell it to do the reverse. And so that's a really neat trick if you're wanting to show how things go together. And again, I could even rearrange these in order or something like that. So again, I'll just do something like this just for the fun of it. Not that this makes sense, but so now when we hit play, you'll see, the blade's going to go in and all this kind of stuff. So it's going to show how this thing assembles together. Obviously, I'd want the blade to go into the cradle, but we kind of do it step by step, and it finally gets put together. Okay. Okay. And I could do the exact same thing. I could say reverse, and it's reversed everything. So now it's going to explode. So cool functionality there. I'm going to go ahead and save this guy, and I'll just call this exploded, because we're going to come back to this here in a little bit. Okay, the next one I want to show is, we've talked about AutoExplode all levels, where it blows every single component apart. Then we have what's called AutoExplode one level, and it basically explodes one level into different, how do I explain this? Let me just show it actually. So I'm going to switch over here. So this is a design of an actual backhoe that really works. Actually, this is a Lego kit. I'm going to switch to design really quick to show you guys something. So here is one of the drawbacks with the animation module. You'll notice I actually have joints on this Lego set, so I can actually rotate all of these arms around and do all this kind of cool stuff with this Lego set. Okay. However, the joints do not carry over into the Animation Workspace. Okay. Which I find unfortunate. Hopefully down the road we might be able to bring those over. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new storyboard, and when I click on new storyboard, you'll notice that it says clean or start from the end of the previous storyboard. So like I said, you can almost think of these as movie scenes where you might want something to happen for a couple frames, and then you might do another storyboard of something else, and then another storyboard, and then you could play them all together. Well, in this case, I'm going to say clean. So starts with a fresh, clean storyboard. I'm going to drag onto my stage, and let's just zoom out a little bit, something like so. Okay, now I'm going to expand this open. And remember I mentioned earlier that your organization and your structure matters? This is exactly what I mean by this. Okay, you'll notice that I've organized this Lego set. So we have this arm, okay? And if I expand open the arm, we have the wrist. So all of the parts that have to do with the wrist. We've got the bucket and all of the parts that have to do with the bucket. And these are all organized very nicely, under sub-assemblies and sub-sub-assemblies, etc. This will help you substantially when you start doing these animations. So we've got the arm, we've got the cab, and basically just a whole bunch of parts underneath the cab. And then we've got the base, and then we've got this wheel assembly. And underneath the wheel assembly, we've got these axles, we've got these wheels, we've got some rims and all that kind of stuff. Okay? So this is what I would call, a high-level assembly. So I've got, basically 4 sub-assemblies here. So when I come in here and say AutoExplode one level, notice it gives me no available components. So I need to pre-select my Lego set. AutoExplode one level. Watch what it's going to do. It's going to keep these Legos grouped together in their assembly. So it's thinking, you can kind of see the progress bar. And let me zoom out here so you can kind of see what's going on. But we can see that the arm is here. We've got the cab, we've got the base, and we've got the wheel assembly. So it exploded these out, but it kept everything together. Like all the children are underneath this particular parent assembly. Okay. Now I can also, change the scale of this, and unfortunately, in this case, it's kind of scaled really weird, where these are moving down quite a bit. However, I'll go ahead and accept that. Oh, actually, you know what? I lied. Let's do this maybe over 3 seconds instead of 6 seconds. Let's take a look at that. We'll explode these out a little bit further. Say OK. Now, I want to, and unfortunately I made a mistake, so let's undo. I was on my stage the whole time, so it didn't explode. Okay, so I'm going to move to 3 seconds. We'll do the one level explode. I'll tell it how long I want it to explode, so let's just go to 3. We'll scale that up just a little bit more, say OK. Now you can kind of see these components down here, and I obviously want to bring these up. So let's just go ahead and move. So I'm going to say edit action for the cab, and let's just move the cab up closer, something like so. Same thing with the base. I'll edit its action, drag that up, and finally the wheel assembly. I'll edit its action, move it up. So now they're a little bit closer together. And when I do the animation, let's go ahead and get rid of the camera. Let's drag here and zoom out a little bit. Now when I hit play, you'll see that those explode as basically like sub-assemblies out. So that's what the one level does. It explodes each of these out individually, but you'll notice that it didn't explode all of the individual components. Now let's say with this wheel assembly, I actually want the wheels to be separate from the axles. So I'm going to go ahead and undo. Let's undo back. Kind of start from scratch here. I'm going to switch back to my design and check this out. So here I am in my design. I'm going to expand open my wheel assembly, and I'm going to right click on this Lego set and say new component. It's going to create a new component at that level, and let's just call this axle assembly. And now I can grab these 3 axles and put them in that axle assembly. So I took them out of the wheel assembly and I put them in this axle assembly, and now we actually have about 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 assemblies. Let's jump back to animation. Notice we see this axle assembly now. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. Let's select that guy, say AutoExplode one level. I'm going to zoom out. Notice the results that we got. It now thinks that's an assembly, so it's grouping those together, and it's keeping these wheels separate. Okay, so we can kind of see how all of these parts are exploding out. So just by reorganizing my browser structure, I'm able to get different results. We made this its own subassembly, so it's exploded as its own subassembly. Hopefully that makes sense. What's kind of cool is that utility knife that you see on the screen right now. This you can actually get. So if I go to my data panel and scroll all the way to the bottom, under design samples, you actually kind of see a little icon of it. I'm going to go under design samples. There it is. So I would go ahead and maybe use something like this to practice the animation with. Instead of doing a 1,000-part assembly or whatever to start with something simple, 5 or 6 parts, and kind of get used to how this animation workspace works. Okay. Okay, moving forward, I'm going to undo back. The next thing I want to talk about is creating actual transformation of components. So here's a prime example. I'm going to jump over here. I'm going to hit play, and you're going to see that, you know, the arm moves up, and then the elbow bends, and then the bucket bends, and then it's going to rotate the whole thing around. So it's almost like pretending like it's scooping up some dirt, and then it's going to move it over and drop it somewhere else. Okay, so how did we go about doing this? Okay, this is all with the transform components. So kind of cool. You can actually simulate how things will physically move. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to come in here, and under transform, I'll click on transform components, and it's asking for components. Now, I can do them individually, but that would be extremely painful. So again, here is where the organization of your structure really does help. So the first thing I want to do is move the arm. So I'm going to go ahead and click on arm, and you'll notice that it's selected all of the components that are underneath arm. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead, now it's asking for a pivot. Now this is where I was talking about earlier, it doesn't have any joints. It doesn't know where to pivot. And you'll notice I don't even have, well, I guess I have my triad way down here. But if I were to start to rotate, you'll see that that does not make sense, right? So I have to do a little bit of manual labor here. So what I'm going to do is rotate around a little bit and click on this set pivot icon. And then I'm going to get kind of near where I want it to pivot, and you'll see there's like a little plus symbol right there. If I move kind of away, there's a little tiny plus symbol. That's the center of that circle. So I'm just going to get near there, and it's going to snap to that. So I'm going to click on it, and here's the thing you have to remember. You have to say, okay, I'm done setting my pivot. So I'm going to click on done, and now my pivot is right there on the arm. And if I were to rotate this, we can see that it's going to rotate that whole arm at that pivot point. Okay, so let's just go ahead and maybe move it up like so. I'll say okay, and now we can see a new thing in our timeline. It took about 3 seconds. And it's basically saying arm. Okay, so let's go maybe 2 more seconds. I'll say transform move. What are the components? I'm going to open up the arm, and this time I'm going to say the wrist and the bucket. I want to rotate both of those guys. I'll set my pivot just like before. I'll kind of zoom up here, click on that little plus icon. And I'm not, darn it, worrying about my camera angles or anything like that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that and rotate that down. I'll say okay, and watch what happens to my timeline when I say okay. We now see that starting at second 3 to second 6, both the wrist and the bucket are moving. Okay, so then let's go maybe only 1 second this time. Transform components. This time let's just do the bucket. I'll set the pivot again. I'll click. And let's rotate the bucket up like so. And it's moving that far in 1 second. So you'll see now there's another little icon right here. So I tend to clear my cameras. So I'm going to go ahead and clear those cameras. And let's just rewind and hit play and see what happens. So the arm's going up sort of slowly, then the arm in the bucket, and then the bucket's moving. Okay? So you can kind of see how that all works. Okay, now I want to rotate the cab, and let's say we want to do the cab in about 2 seconds. So I'll say transform components. Let's do the cab, but I also want the arm to go with it. So I'm going to control select the arm subassembly. So all of this stuff is going to move. Well, now I need to set the pivot. And unfortunately, I can't see where to pivot around. So what I'm going to do is actually turn off the cab. Let's open up the base here a little bit. I'm just going to turn off that last part there, and now we can see the actual little Lego piece that allows it to rotate. So I'm going to click on that guy, say OK. Zoom back out of here a little bit. Let's turn the cab back on. And now I'm going to rotate. And we can see that the whole cab is rotating. Let's do something like that, and I'll say OK. And we'll see something was added to the arm. If I scroll down, we can see something's added to the cab. And then you'll notice another icon that appeared, and it has a little light bulb icon on it. And this is the ShowHide. So you can actually have parts turn on or turn off in your animation at a particular time. And the reason this was automatically recorded is because I turned that off, and so it recorded that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I don't need that action in there. Okay, so let's rewind, hit play, and take a look at what this looks like. So there goes the arm, then the elbow and the bucket, and then it's going to rotate around. But you'll notice that the camera is moving also. Because I moved, it recorded that camera action. And this is what I was talking about. I just let it happen, and then I come in and I just delete that out of there. And now we can see the camera isn't moving. Okay, so let's just say this is our final design that we want. We've got the movements that we want. Now I want to add in some cameras. Okay, so let's go ahead and get kind of near the end, and I'm just going to rotate like so, and we can see there's that camera, and I want it to happen the whole time, so I'm just going to drag that to the left so we can kind of see how it's starting there, it's rotating there, and then it's ending there. And maybe here in the middle somewhere we're just a little bit too close, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And you'll notice it's now broken into 2 camera movements. So we've got this guy, and then we have this guy. Okay? So you can kind of control what you want that to look like. So, for example, here I could pan this over, and it's going to split that guy into multiple camera movements. So this is why I usually do the cameras kind of near the end. In fact, I can see that that last is pretty far over to the right, so let's just move that back a little bit. And now we can kind of see how everything's staying sort of centered. Okay. Now, I don't like having a whole bunch of camera movements. I typically just have a stationary view. I typically zoom out in the stage until I kind of get a nice representation. And then when I hit play, you know, we can see what that's going to look like. So what I would do now is I would come in and tweak with some of these movements, because, for example, this very first arm takes a really long time to not move very far. Okay, so I might come in here and just drag that to about a second. And then let's just select all of these guys and move them over a little bit. Whoops, darn it. So I'm going to grab those and move them over. Okay. Now when we play this, oops, what did I do? I'll hit play, so you'll see it goes a little bit faster. It didn't take as long. And maybe we want the rotation, and now I accidentally moved that guy, so we should move him back. Maybe we want the rotation of the cab or something to be a little bit slower or something, so we could stretch these guys out another second or so. Okay. So enough with that. Hopefully that makes sense on how you can transition and move components around. The key thing is have it well organized. If it was all flat structure, you would spend a lot of time having to go through and select all of them, etc. So having them organized in these like sub-assemblies will really help you out. Just for fun, let's say our little backhoe is digging and he accidentally hits some dynamite or something like that. So we're gonna do an AutoExplode all levels. Let me select that guy first. I told you I do that all the time. So all levels does not keep the structure. It explodes every single part out. And so it's gonna do all of these movements first, and then in a matter of about 2 seconds, it's going to explode all of the components. And you can see it's thinking, it's taking some time to do this because there's quite a few components in this assembly. Okay, looking over at the comments, looks like everything's going pretty good. Angelo, thanks for helping out there. So yeah, so here you can see all of the components, and as I drag this, we can see them all moving individually. There's another cool little icon here called trail line visibility. So it'll actually show you the direction, like these little trail lines, which way they're going. I can turn that on or off. Let's just go ahead and say okay. We'll hit rewind. Let me get here. And we'll just hit play. We'll watch the thing move around. And then at the very end, it should explode out into a bunch of different pieces. So lots of control there. And I could change where this was in time. You can kind of see all of these individual components are happening at this between second 9 and second 10. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this menu that I want to show. Restore home basically puts things back. Like if I click on this arm and I say restore home, it'll put it back in its original home location, but you can see that it's still exploded. Not the best example there. Let's go something like this. Let's just do maybe like the cab. Click too fast. I'll say restore home. Yeah, it's because I did the explode, it's not going to let me do that. But it basically just puts it back in its original location, kind of like revert when you're using the assembly commands. We talked about auto-exploding one level, auto-exploding all levels, and manual explode. And like I said, in all honesty, I use this one probably 99% of the time. I just glanced over ShowHide, but it basically allows you to show or hide. And let's do it on this guy. So maybe we want this front or this left component to disappear. So I'm going to go ahead and select it and say show hide. And you'll see that it's basically showing it lit up here and then dimmed out there. Let's see. So you can see that it's hidden right now. So let's go ahead and toggle that guy on or off. Okay, so here's what, it's a two-part process. You kind of have to say when you want it lit up and when you want it not displayed. So I'm going to go to 0. Let me come back here to, and let's do the show hide again. And so there it's shown. So as we're dragging across, it's shown, and then it turns off. So you can kind of see how it's displayed and then it turns off. Okay. Same thing, you can specify the duration. When does it start? When does it end? It doesn't dim like I wish it would. It would like slowly dim down. Maybe that's in a future release, but we'll have to see. So that's show hide, and then same thing with appearance. You can change the appearance of the parts if you want to. But I'm not going to show that. It's just as simple as, you know, creating an appearance or whatever, just like you've done in other stuff. So we've basically covered all of that. The next icon is this annotation icon, where it's called create a callout. And so I can actually click on something and say, sharp point or something like that. Say OK, and it's going to create a callout there. So as I drag this along, you'll see there's the callout, and then it actually moves with that particular part. And if I were to hover over this, it tells me either, whatever I typed in. I could have given it the part name, I could have given it a warning or whatever. So that's what the annotation is for. Okay, so this last thing, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this guy. Let me just undo the display. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is publishing and then actually creating a drawing of an exploded view. So we have about 9 minutes left here. So I've done my animation. I've got everything the way I want. Let's go ahead. I'll just go ahead and save this real quick. And then I can come in here and say publish video. And you'll notice it gives me, I can do the current storyboard or I could do all of the storyboards. So if I had multiple storyboards, almost like a movie, I could do all of them if I wanted to. I can specify a custom size, but I'll just go ahead and do the current document window size and say OK. And it's going to create, I'm actually in the wrong menu here. I'll just do it in here real quick. It's going to create an AVI file. So I could save it to my computer with downloads, and it's going to be called Utility Knife. Okay, so it's going to create an animation or a video of that for me. So it might take a couple moments as we do this. Let me glance over at the chat. Looks like Angelo's been busy. Okay. Thank you. Somebody said this is a good video tutorial for beginners. I appreciate those kind of comments. If you like these, make sure you give a thumbs up and leave comments on future topics that you want to see, because it's because of you guys that I'm actually doing this animation live stream, because a couple people have asked for something like this. So I'm doing another live stream coming up here pretty soon called In Context Design. It's probably going to be a multi-part live stream, because I'll show you what I'm actually doing here. I have it sitting right here. I don't know if you can see it. I'm out of my old drafting book. We're going to create that whole assembly and learn how to design it in context with each other. And this is actually an old, it is really old. You can see Post-it notes and everything. That was a drafting book that one of my teachers gave me back in college. So we're going to do that in a future live stream or future live streams. Okay, so it created the video for me. If I were to search for this real quick, let me go into my downloads. And you'll see the Utility Knife video clip. So we can watch the video, and so it's going to go through the animation, and so you can kind of see it explode out. Hopefully this is sharing. I don't know if it is or not, so I'm not going to make it bigger just to save time, but it recorded that video for us. Okay, so the last thing is to actually create a drawing. So check this out. If I go into my workspaces and I go to my drawing workspace, you can see it says from design or from animation. So I'm going to say from animation. And again, it allows me to pick which storyboard. If I had multiple storyboards, I could pick which one. And I want to do, let's just say inch, let's just say C size. I'll say OK. I'll come in here, and it's going to use that animation to create our drawing. So we can see different orientations. So I could say front, I could say right or whatever. It's going to use that exploded animation for that. So let's go ahead and do home. We'll go ahead and place that right there. I want it to be shaded. I'll say, yeah, we'll just leave it like that. I'll say okay. And it's going to use that animation to create this exploded view. So I could come in and, oh, my screen's not showing up. Maybe it was still thinking. Just a second here. There we go. I could come in here and do a table. So I'll throw that there. It's going to automatically number these for me. I could reorder these, reposition them if I needed to. So pretty powerful to create an exploded view, kind of like what I just showed in the drafting book, using Fusion 360. So hopefully you learned something new. The animation module, you have to put a little bit of effort into it to get it to work correctly. But like I said, bring up this utility knife and practice with that first. You know, it's about 6 or 7 parts. You know, learn how to do the animation, and then you can animate your 3D printer design or, you know, whatever else you've designed using Fusion 360. So with that, I want to thank you for your attendance. I want to thank Angelo for helping me out. Hopefully you learned something. And like we always say with Fusion 360, you can make anything. So go out there and make anything. Thank you.